Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We have a wonderful guest today, Jim Nix. Jim, thank you for joining us. I'm a big fan, and I do want to point out you put up your website, Nomadic Pursuits. Uh, I think people should definitely go to that because there are a lot of resources. It's not just pictures that you've shot. You've put up a lot of resources for people, everything from great locations to shoot at, as well as tips with both the Luminar as well as Aurora. But why don't you go ahead and give us a little bit of an introduction to yourself and a little bit of your background?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for joining. I really appreciate it. And some of you may know me from my activity with the Skyloom / MacFun team over the last few years. I love the products. I think that's pretty obvious. I'm a travel photographer and a blogger and really a YouTuber at this point, just because I create a lot of videos, and you can see my channel there, or you can just search my name on YouTube and find it. But I absolutely love photography. I guess that's obvious, but I also love HDR, and I've been doing it for a long time. And I was inspired by the same one that inspired everybody else. His name's Trey Ratcliffe, and he co-developed Aurora HDR with MacFun / Skyloom, and that's what we'll be going over today. But this is from London. I just got back. I took a little photo trip over there, and I was basically firing brackets into the wind nearly 24/7, it seemed like, because I had a lengthy list of places to get to, and you know, you only have so much time, right? So anyway, I captured a lot. I'm going to be editing some photos today that I took in London. Obviously, I'm going to be using Aurora for that. And anyway, my background, I've just been doing this for a long time in terms of my photography and my blogging, and my YouTube thing's a little bit newer. I've only been doing that for a couple of years. And it's kind of my favorite thing, to be honest, because it's really like a one-to-one audience. I mean, clearly I'm putting it on the web for the consumption of as many people as are willing to consume it, but it feels like a one-to-one. I feel like I'm speaking directly to someone that's across the desk for me and trying to educate them on what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. So I talk a lot about technique and tips and tricks, and sometimes I get into the art of photography, which I really enjoy talking about. So that's really it for my background. Let me close this this photo here, and let's see here. Hello, there we go. Okay, close that, and let me open up Luminar, not Luminar. This is Aurora HDR. I use them both so much that I interchangeably call them by the wrong name half the time. So my apologies if I do that. But we're all about Aurora HDR here. So this is the first photo I'm going to work on, and it was blue hour, which is really at about 4:30 in the afternoon this time of year in London, which is actually kind of great. But it's along the bank of the river there that runs through the middle of town, and it's an old pub. And truthfully, I don't know a whole lot about it, and sadly, I never went in it. But I photographed it before, and that's actually one of my tips that I'd like to share today, and that is, don't hesitate to reshoot the same thing, again and again and again. I mean, I've shot this 2 or 3 times in my life, and I was happy to shoot it again. In fact, it was high on my list because I always feel like I'm getting better over time with my capture and my editing. So that's something that I think, even though it may seem monotonous to shoot the same thing again and again, I think you can approach it in new and different and creative ways. And so I really feel that monotony can sort of spark some creativity for you. So that's one thing. Okay, so I'm going to start here in the HDR basic panel, which is really where I start with every photo. And it's a great filter, for lack of a better word. It's got all these sliders in it here, so it's not really a filter as much as it is a collection of filters. But I love HDR basic, so I'm going to start with enhancing the HDR enhance slider. So I'm going to move that, pretty decently, maybe around 40 or something like that. And the thing I like about that one is it's intelligent. It gives it a nice little bump, but it doesn't like make it a crazy sort of over the top HDR. It literally enhances the photo. It's not called HDR crazy or something, right? So I like that quite a bit. And of course, Smart Tone, which I'm on now, is probably one of my favorite things because it's super intelligent. As the name implies, it is smart, and I'm going to go about the same there. But when you're dragging it to the right, it's brightening the photo, but it's only brightening the parts that are dark. The stuff that's already bright, it doesn't really mess with. And so I love that about it. And conversely, it works the same in the other direction. If you're going to the left to darken things, it's going to darken the stuff that's kind of bright without darkening the stuff that's really already dark. So it works really well that way. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't add a little bit of contrast. And that's something I tend to do is I'll play contrast and smart tone off of each other because, as you saw, let me just do that again. The photo is a little bit brighter, right? And when I drag the contrast to the right, it is darkening the photo in a way. And so that's where I like to bounce that and smart tone off of each other and sort of, to me, they're sort of two peas in a pod or whatever, pick your goofy analogy. But that's generally how I like to approach that. Now, if you don't have Aurora, this is not a full tutorial. There's plenty of those on the Skyloom website. I have plenty of those on my YouTube channel. Many other great photographers have videos as well. So I'm not touching on things like the lens correction and the transform tools in this photo, but there's a lot of power just in the HDR basic panel. And you can literally go from start to just about finish depending on the photo in that one panel. So it's very powerful. And I just wanted to point that out because I'm frankly not taking advantage of everything there in this photo, but I wanted to let you know that if you haven't used the product before, it's very much worth your time getting to know it. Okay, next I'm going to do a color. And in this case, I like the colors. I don't want to go crazy. So something I often do is I'll just bump up the vibrance a little bit. And, as the name implies, it makes them a bit more vibrant, but it generally sort of adds saturation and pop to the colors that aren't sort of already saturated. And so it sort of takes the non-dominant colors and gives them a little boost, and therefore, in turn, in my opinion, creates a bit more boost across the entire photo. So I like that quite a bit. And then color contrast, let me just show you what that does. You can kind of see how that's basically creating greater contrast between the colors. And so in this color filter, I went from that to that. So the sky is probably the most obvious change here, but if you're looking over here as well, to me the colors and the contrast pop a little bit more, and I like that. So it's pleasing in my eye, and I do like color, so I can't apologize for that. That's something I just love. So was there a question there? I thought I saw my my webinar notification pop. So if there's a question, let me know. Now, one of the things we talked about was the creative freedom. And to me, one of the great things about Aurora and Luminar both is this history panel. And that really does give you a whole lot of creative freedom. And so you can see here, the history panel literally does track my history with the photo. So I can go back to the original, and that's where I started. And all my edits are wiped temporarily from the filters over here on the right-hand side. But I can come in and say, well, maybe I want to go back to this place because I really like that look. Or, I can go all the way back to my most current state, which is there. And so I love that about Aurora and Luminar because they have that flexibility. And so that's one of the great things and one of the really hidden gems, I think, in this pair of software products. Now, something I like to do is to save. And now it's called the Anchor Pub. So the brackets I just called Anchor 1, 2, and 3. But when you hit save like this, that's very different, by the way, than coming over here and saying, hey, I want to export to image and, blah, 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 doing whatever and hitting save there. That's saving your edits as a file format, a JPEG or a TIFF or whatever. So while I do that when I'm finished with the photo, there are many times that I might be sitting in my office and something comes up and I'm like, oh gosh, I got to come back to this photo later. So I'll say file, save. And then, I could call this Anchor almost done, right? Because I'm not exactly done, but I think I'm close. So some name to make it stick out and let me know what it is and kind of where I am. And then you have these two boxes here, well, three technically, but two that I generally check because I'm on a Mac. I'm not necessarily concerned about it being Windows compatible, but that's great to know, I'm sure, for those of you that use a PC. You can save the original resources and save the history. And so when I hit save here, this is basically saving all that stuff in a native file format. And so I can close Aurora, completely quit it. And here it is. Here's my Anchor almost done. And that is a Luminar file. And now I can double click it. And you're going to have to give that a minute because it's kind of a fat file. But let me open that back up. And while we're waiting for that, if there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer that. But I'm going to bring that file back up.
Let me hop in for a second there, Jim. I wanted to point out one. If you notice in that save panel, and we'll probably be revisiting that again, when you save it, if nothing is checked, it just saves the projects and points to the media wherever it is. But if you go through the different checkboxes, the first one actually embeds a copy of your RAW file or your JPEGs into that Aurora project file. So it's portable. You can take it anywhere you want, open it up, and you're not going to get file offline. So that's the useful part about saving the first checkbox. And the second one, which is history, only adds a little bit more to the size of the file, but you'll see in a moment all the benefits that Jim gets from doing that. And then finally, the Windows compatible. What that does is it, again, saves the file. Doesn't save the history because we're not there yet for cross compatibility, but it will embed the original image into that file so it can be opened up on a Windows machine. And I just wanted to point that out. So go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, good stuff. Thank you very much for sharing that. And so now I'm back in the photo. Everything's here. And, there's my history just as it was, even though you saw me save the file and close the app and it was gone. So I reopened the file and here we go. I'm back exactly where I was. And so let's say, whatever my short-term emergency was is over and now I'm back and I'm like, you know what? I want to do a little bit more. So maybe I'm going to add some structure, but you know what? I want to mask that in. So this is where the power of layers comes in handy. So what I did is I go up here to the layers panel and I click on plus and add new adjustment layer. And then I can open structure and I can just drag it to, however much structure I want in the photo. But, these are global edits when you're moving these sliders unless you mask them in specific to a layer. And so that's what I'd like to do here. I come in and say, all right, so I'm going to add structure, but I'm going to get on the layer. I'm going to get the brush and I'm over here now. And you can see, make sure you're in paint, check your, opacity and size. And I'm going to use the right bracket key. And I'm going to go pretty large because I'm just going to cover this area with those the HDR structure adjustment. I really just care about this center of the photo. I just want to give it a little bit of boost. And if you're ever unsure about what you've painted, in terms of that mask, you just come over here to this little eyeball and you can see what I've painted. So I might drop the size, that would be left bracket key to go back down in size, and then come over here and do a little bit more just to sort of get all those parts covered, and then you can click that to close it. And now I've just added that HDR structure to that specific area, and I did that using the layers panel. So I can still come in here and say, well, I want to add more structure to that section, and hopefully you can see that now that I've taken it to 100, it's gotten really crunchy in the areas where I'd already masked it because now I'm working just within that mask.
Jim, I'm going to step in for a second because I'm curious what your thought process is when you're doing this. I noticed you didn't work with the sky with any kind of that structure. And so when you're creating the image, what is your intention when painting in some structure, or what are you avoiding by not painting in structure in some areas?
Yeah, so when you, well, I've already created the mask, but like when you haven't created the mask, these adjustments are global in nature, meaning they cover the entire photo. And if you add something like structure, which really makes the detail pop, it creates, I don't know what the technical term is, to be honest, but I call it crunchiness. It makes the photo a little bit crunchy. And I absolutely abhor skies that are crunchy. And so applying this globally, to me is not the way I would want to do it, because I don't want that crunchiness or that detailed look in the sky. I like very smooth skies, and I'm going to do that in a minute with the denoise filter, which is here.
I think that's one of the things that makes your images stand out, is that you don't globally just add structure, add filters, that, it feels more natural because the crunchy is where the crunchy should be and the smooth is where the smooth should be.
Yeah, absolutely. And, so when I first started doing HDR many years ago, I didn't really, number one, I didn't have all this capability. But number two, I also just didn't understand. I just thought it was kind of fun to move sliders. And I did it a lot. And I made a bunch of images that I wouldn't be so proud of these days. And we all change and evolve and develop our skills and our tastes and stuff over time. So I think that's normal. But yeah, to your point, I mean, I've just gotten to where I know what I like and I know what I don't like. And so it's sort of developed into, my flavor, my style. I don't know what you call it. It's just, I call it, this is what I like, which is, little bit structure-y in the right places. Like I expect to see detail and structure and stuff in brickwork and stonework, and I think it adds a little bit to the image, but I don't want it all over the buildings because truthfully, I don't really want your eye over here on the left-hand side, and I don't really care a whole lot about your eye being over there with those plants. I'm mostly, to me, the anchor in the front of the pub and the little street here is not just the center of the photo, but also the center of the photo in terms of its importance. And
So
so,
you're using your structure kind of the way some people might use luminance. Our eye is drawn to the brightest part. In your case, you like the fact that the eye is drawn to the most detailed part.
to a certain extent, yeah. But I also, now that I have that mask in place, my next move was to come over here and do a little bit of exposure bump there, which is going to create a little bit more center focus, for lack of a better word. And then also I add a slight bit of warmth just to make it look more like those lights are kicking off kind of a yellowy glow on that center of the sidewalk. And so I can hit done, by the way, because I'm done with the mask. So I can turn off the layer. And now, obviously we've been looking at the further edits, but now I look at it and in comparison, it looks kind of dull in the center. Then when I turn it back on, I'm like, oh, okay, the lights are kind of shining. It's starting to get dark. It's kind of detailed where I like it to be detailed, and the lights are kind of reflecting on the cobblestones or the bricks, whatever you call them. So, yeah, it's kind of like a version of drawing the attention of the viewer to a certain specific part of the photo.
Now, a couple people, actually several people have asked, are we working with a single image or did you bring in several bracketed images?
Great question. So it's a 3 exposure bracket. You can see that right here. I just happened to stick the 3 images together and I put them in Aurora before I started the webinar, just so you didn't have to wait, because I use JPEGs on my videos and in these webinars because they're smaller and snappier than the raw files that I would normally edit on my own. However, even JPEGs at full size these days are pretty large, and so they can be a little bit slow. Just because they're fat files, for lack of a better word. And so it is a 3 exposure bracket, as you can see. And I'm actually really glad that came up, because another tip, for lack of a better word, that I have is when I first started HDR, everything I read and every there were a number of people, not just Trey, but other people, and I don't know who said this, so I'm not saying, hey, Trey said this, so I had to do it. Everything I read, everybody said, well, you take 3 or 5 or 7 exposure, whatever the number was, and you do them like this. You go -2 for dark, 0 for in the middle, and +2 for light. Or you go -4 for really dark, -2 for kind of dark, 0 for your middle, and then +2 for kind of light, and +4 for really, really light or bright. In other words, everybody seemed to say, center your exposures, like 0, your 0 exposure was always quote unquote supposed to be your middle exposure. And I just don't do that. As you can see here, this is 3 exposures, and 0 is actually my brightest. I started with -4. So I shot a 3 exposure bracket set of -4, -2, and 0. So my center exposure is actually -2. That's what people call exposing to the left. And basically you're shooting a little bit darker, because in my opinion, it's easier to recover some information from the shadows than it is to recover stuff from highlights that are blown out. And just in my experience, I found that when I was centering exposures, the really bright ones were sometimes pure white. Like there's no point in having it. It was utterly useless. And so I've just gotten over time to where I shoot, I usually start at -4 or -3. And so if it's -3 and I'm shooting 3, it'd be -3, -1, +1. In this case, it's -4. And I think one of my photos today, if we get to it, is a -5, -3, -1s, because it was pretty bright. And so that's just I don't know if you call it a tip, but
that's actually a great piece of advice. And you generally do 2 stops between your brackets?
I do, yeah. So for many years, years ago, I shot 7 religiously. I shot 7 exposures at 1 stop apart each. But I don't feel like with today's cameras I have to do that. I have a full frame Sony mirrorless camera, and the sensor and what it captures is kind of insane, to be honest. And I don't even have the top of the line camera, but it's good, and it's incredible. And so I don't feel like I need it. Many times I'll just use Luminar and just take a single exposure, and I get plenty of what I need out of it. But certainly many times I'm also building HDRs, and because I love HDR. So yeah, good question. But I do shoot 3 these days. The only time I wouldn't shoot 3, I'd expand that to 5 or 7 if I was in a situation where the disparity between the bright parts and the dark parts of the photo was really great. So an example of that would be like inside a cathedral, where you have bright light coming in from the windows and then you have the darkness of the interior. And so I would shoot 5 or 7 there. Those would be like, maybe 1 stop, 7 for sure would be 1 stop apart, right? So I would do that in that case, but certainly not in a situation like this. I mean, I can't, even in cathedrals, I can't think of a time recently in the last couple of years where I've gone more than 3. So I generally get everything I need out of it, because the files are just really detailed these days, which is great.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. So the only other thing I would do here is add a new layer, an adjustment layer, and I'd stick some denoise on it. And that's just because my thing about skies, I just like skies that are smooth. So, you can kind of do whatever you want. And notice that photo's getting soft, and it's because I have a new layer and I haven't masked anything in. So it's applying these edits globally. Let me show you the before and the after. So I'm losing all the stuff that I added here in the center. Excuse me. So once again, I just grab the brush. I'm going to shrink the size, and this is going to be kind of sloppy. I'm not going to go gently around a lot of this stuff. I'm just going to kind of cover up some of the noise. And there's not a lot, truthfully. I mean, these sensors today do a great job of managing noise. I'm a little bit of a freak about skies being really smooth. And so I just like to do that. And that's how I would do it. Now, I would go slower in real life. I would not go in between all the palm fronds on this palm looking tree. I guess it's a palm. What's a palm doing in London? I'm not really sure. But come to think of it, like what? But I would go slower around here. I would not go, over the top of the shard. I would make sure I went around that and stuff. So I would do a better job if I was doing this on my own. But for a live show, no point in trying to be detailed about it, because it takes too long. So, okay. So there's the before. That's the middle exposure. That would be the -2. That's what's being compared. And there's the after. And one more time, there's before and after. And of course, you can do a split screen to see that as well. And, I think it's quite obvious what I've done to the photo, right? And frankly, and if it's not your look or whatever, I totally get that. I mean, HDR can be polarizing, although you joined a webinar that was about HDR, so you're probably interested. But I like fairly saturated images, without creating something that's too over the top. But, one man's over the top is the next man's, hey, that looks pretty good. So to each his own. That's a long way of saying that. So if there's not any questions on that one, I'll jump into another photo, because I got a few more, and I'm not sure. We're kind of, I'm not moving as fast as I thought I was going to move. Let me get another set of brackets here. Let me see. I'm going to do, let's see. I'll do this little castle, because castles are cool. So let me bring that up. I shot this on a tripod, I'm fairly certain. But when I merge brackets, I often check alignment anyway, just in case. And I like to check the chromatic aberration and ghost reduction just in case. It wasn't windy, as I recall, but you never know if something's moving. So the nice thing about ghost reduction is you can choose the intensity of it. I just checked medium, because again, I'm not, we're doing this live, and I don't need it to do a high degree of ghost reduction. But the ghost reduction and the alignment, in my experience in Aurora, work incredibly well. In fact, I had to do a video once on Aurora, and one of the things I was trying to demonstrate was how bad a photo would look if you didn't align it. And I was taking handheld brackets that were fairly well off each other, because I shot it handheld and I'm kind of twitchy anyway. And they kept lining up perfectly, and I literally couldn't get it to not line up. So anyway, sorry, my dog gets a little excited about things. Maybe she liked my joke. Anyway, so that's a great thing about Aurora. Okay, so still in England. This is in Kent, England, and this is a place called Scotney Castle, and it looks to me, I got there and I was like, oh my gosh, this looks like a Thomas Kinkade painting. And if you don't know Thomas Kinkade, that's okay. He's, I don't know, I used to see his stuff in the malls, in the shopping malls and whatnot. Anyway, immaterial, but he painted in many ways, he was kind of an HDR painter. If you sort of buy my description there, but I think he called himself a painter of light. But there's always these kind of scenes with interesting kind of historic looking things and light shining in the right. Anyway, it's interesting work. Nonetheless, I got there and I said, God, this looks like a Thomas Kincaid painting. So I thought I would do a little bit here to sort of build upon that and kind of go from there. So here I've got 3 exposures, again, -4, -2, and 0, right? So that would be the -2, which would be my center exposure. And truthfully, you could probably take that single exposure and work fine with it. There's, it's not too dark in the shadows there in the water, and it's not too blown out in the sky. So nonetheless, I like to start with something. When I'm doing HDR, I like to start with the photo with the light as evenly balanced as possible. And that's one of the things I love about HDR is I actually want to start with an image that's really flat like this. That's because I like to start with kind of a flat canvas, for lack of a better word, and then build upon it. So let me go ahead and do a few edits here. The first thing I look at is the temperature, because I'm here in the HDR basic panel, and I just kind of want to go a little bluer. I really like blue, and you probably, if you've looked at any of my work, you probably see a lot of blues, and that's just because I like them. And at the same time, one of the things I like to do is take the tint and sort of go the other way. And let me show you. I mean, it's subtle, but to me, the photo kind of has a little bit of a yellow color cast. And while there's nothing wrong with it, I mean, it was, late-ish afternoon. Well, okay, sunset's at like 4 o'clock, but so it was maybe 2 o'clock. But it was kind of yellowy out. The sun was way off to my right, kind of shining on the cast a little bit, but I want to create a little softer mood. So I'm jacking with the colors a little bit. And then I'm going to take the contrast up just because, as I said, generally the base HDR photo comes out fairly flat. And by flat, I mean A, lacking contrast, and also B, somewhat evenly distributed in terms of the light. And so that's exactly what I want to start with. And then HDR Enhance, I think we talked about that before. And that, if you look here now, it's kind of bringing up some of the details here. The grass and some of the stonework's gotten a little bit more detailed with the, or at least the appearance. It's kind of like clarity in some words. It's HDR Enhance, to me, is kind of like a clarity slider.
Jim,
I think it works.
We're getting some people have had a couple of questions, and I just want to make sure we get them in before we run out of time. There are some history questions, and it's you had shown us how the history was saved with the previous document. In your workflow, do you save it again at various points, or make duplicates or copies so you have different stages? How do you leverage that, or do you just go with the natural flow of Aurora's remembering every step you make?
Yeah, good question. So there's not really a short answer. The short answer is it depends. The long answer is it depends on if I'm traveling or if I'm at home. If I'm traveling, I'll dump a lot of raw files onto my desktop. I currently manage my photo library in Lightroom. I'm eager to get my hands on the asset manager when Skyloom has it ready. But currently I'm in Lightroom, and so but I don't bring my Lightroom. It's all on external drives. That's at home when I'm traveling, and so I'll dump a bunch of raw files on my desktop. If I have time while I'm gone, then I'll edit some photos. I can save it, or do save it, as a TIFF file and as a native Aurora file. And then if I get to where I think I'm finished with it, I'll also save it as a full-size JPEG, which I put in my SmugMug portfolio. And then I also save it as a smaller JPEG that I'll use on social media, on my blog, on Flickr, that sort of thing. So like on the road, I save a lot of different things. At home, if I get interrupted or don't have time to finish, then yeah, I'll save it as the native file format, put it on my desktop. But generally, when I sit down to edit a photo, and I say generally because there's no absolutes here. Generally, I'll make sure I finish and complete it before I wrap up that session, right? So I'll save it. It'll go back into Lightroom. It creates a duplicate copy, et cetera, et cetera. And so it ends up back in my Lightroom library. And then so that means I would not have saved it in the native format because I will have completed the photo.
So you don't keep a copy of the Aurora project file to retweak once you've gotten where you want it to be. You're happy and move forward.
Yeah, so I'm kind of, I don't know what the word is, maybe zen about that. And that is that, like, once I complete a photo and I publish it, I'm kind of like, okay, I'm done. I don't really necessarily want to go back and pick up, let me back up 2 steps and redo something. What I generally do is, if I don't like a photo, I kind of want to start with the blank canvas because I want to come at it with fresh eyes or fresh skills. And so I absolutely advocate going back sort of into the archives and pulling out photos and re-editing them. But when I do that, I'm doing it with the intent to come up with something very different, not something slightly different. And so I don't take advantage of that once I've completed a photo. I like to, close the door, close whatever you call it, finish that chapter, if you will.
Got it.
Let
me ask another question, because you were talking about, you export all the different flavors, TIFFs and JPEGs for different purposes. And I know you go back and forth between Aurora and Luminar a lot. I know we were talking yesterday, and you were saying how there's great stuff in both programs. Could you talk a little bit about the workflow where you might do something or start in Aurora and then take advantage of Luminar?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I haven't done that with this photo. I was planning to stay in, in Aurora for this, but absolutely, you can, export it to the other program, and I do that many times. And the truth is, like, I love Aurora. It's an absolutely great product. It's fabulous. I think it's by far the best HDR product out there. But there are times when I'm like, I need something more, or it's not even that I need it as much as I'm looking for something to spark my sort of creativity or curiosity, and maybe it's not there. And so that's when I might say, well, let me take this photo, and open in, and then click on Luminar. And I'm not going to do it right now because I don't want to wait for it, but I'd click on Luminar, and then it'll take me over there. And, Luminar has 50 filters. So like 50, that's just so many. It's almost incomprehensible. And that's one of the things I love about it. And I think these two work very well, obviously made by the same company and designed to work well. But part of my workflow, sometimes I'll start to finish in Aurora only. Sometimes I'll take a photo that's a single exposure and start to finish in Luminar only. I've taken many single exposures, start to finish in Aurora only, even though it's a single exposure. And then many times I'll build my base HDR. I'll make some tweaks in the HDR basic panel, and then I'll save it. If I'm in Lightroom, I have to go back to my host program and then go from there onto Luminar. Or if I'm not using it, from Lightroom, if I just have the files on my desk, I'll just do what I showed you here, and I'll just take the base HDR and I'll say open in, and I'll go over here and click on Luminar and take advantage of those 50 filters, because I'm sure everybody's been there where you're like, I want to do something. I want to create something. I don't know what it is, and it might suck, but I just want to do something. And sometimes for me, changing programs provides that little spark of creativity, because I might say, ooh, you know what I could do? I could use color balance here, which is frankly one of my favorite filters in Luminar. And I could take color balance and do all kinds of cool stuff. I could turn that night sky into looking like blah, 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 whatever. So I bounce back and forth between them quite a bit. And I'd love to tell you that there's a great logical reason why each time, but there's not. I mean, I'm a little bit like a ferret on a double espresso at times, and I'm just like, ooh, cool, shiny, twinkly lights or whatever. So I have my fair share of those moments. So did that answer the question?
Absolutely. That was great. Appreciate that.
Okay. Yeah, sure. So I'm going to take the highlights down here, something like that, just because the sky is too bright, and that's part of the beauty. You have all these individual controls, again, in the basic panel. I'm going to go back to color. I'm going to skip saturation again. There's a decent amount of color there. And for me, the vibrance bump that I'm giving it helps. I think that looks pretty cool, but also this color contrast, same thing I used earlier. It really creates a bit of pop in the color. And if you look at it, there's the before and there's the after. And the colors are, to me, more saturated and quote unquote better. And I didn't even move saturation. And so that's, if you're not using color contrast, I definitely recommend taking a a look at it, because it's a very, very useful slider. Since I'm creating a little bit of a painterly effect, not totally, but a little bit, I'm going to add some image radiance, something like that, just to give it a little bit of shadow. And that's another thing I like to point out about HDRs. When I first started taking HDR photos and editing them, one of the things I liked about it was you could light up a whole scene. You can, basically bring light into areas that your camera wasn't showing you there was any light in, with a single exposure. And so, like, great for cathedrals, like I said earlier. But scenes like this, I mean, you expect to see shadow. In fact, there's shadow in the water. It's very obvious. And what I've seen with a lot of HDR photos is that, they lack any of that contrast, and they lack any shadow. And therefore, to me, they don't, they're past the point of reality. And that's okay. Like, I've done plenty of photos where I'm way past reality, and I don't even know where I'm going, but, and that's okay. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying, in my opinion, I like to make sure I have some shadow. So even though you can get rid of shadow and brighten the entire image, I like to bring some back, because I think it adds an element of mystery and realism, and, like, let the viewer guess a little bit about the photo. Don't, if everything is completely 100% visible, to me, some of the mystery is gone. And so that's one of the things I like about things like image radiance. So there, I mean, it doesn't look bad. There's some shadow and contrast, but to me, it's a little bit more interesting with the image radiance on it. So just something I like to do. Polarizing filter is going to be a slight adjustment, maybe something like that. And this might be where you come in and say, what all have I done? Let me go back to this original. Okay. And you might look at it and say, okay, and now where am I? And then you come back and you make that comparison, and you might say, okay, either I like it or I don't like it. And obviously you can go back in here to any of these points in between and, return to wherever you may have been at that time. And so that's a beautiful thing. And, we kind of talked about that earlier. So I'm just sort of clicking through to show you how it operates.
Now, if you make a change when you're back in time, how does that affect everything you've done after the change?
Exactly. So let's say I go here to this color contrast, and after that I got into image radiance and polarizing filter. But let's say I go to color contrast again up here, and what if I say, well, I don't really want it at 34. I want to maybe bump it, give the colors a little bit more amp. I'm going to go really a little bit more painterly and saturated. Okay, cool. I like that. Now let me go back in history to where wait a minute, where'd it go? And, to your point, Abba, basically what I did is, if you go back in history and then start moving sliders around, that's your new point of end of your history, if you will, is your most recent adjustment is the end of your history. And so the stuff I'd done after color contrast, which was image radiance and polarizing filter, they're gone. So I would have to go back here and say, hey, I want to get that image radiance back, and I want to get that polarizing filter back. And so, yeah, you got to absolutely be aware of that, I guess, is the best way of saying it. And you know what? You could come back up here with Smart Tone and say, I'm going to bring back a little bit of that shadow, because I don't want it to be too dark. And so, we're kind of getting into this saturated kind of painterish look, but, that's kind of what I was going for. So, and now you can see, your history is what we've been doing since that last time I returned to history and made an edit. And so that's definitely something to keep in mind. So from here, I would probably go into top and bottom tuning. And this is I feel like I say this every time, like, this is one of my favorite filters, but it's true. I love this because it's basically a gradient mask that you can use to divide the picture in half, right? So if you click on set orientation, you can move this around, and all you're doing is you're telling Aurora, okay, here's the top and here's the bottom. So the top is anything above this line, right? So I should say this line here. The top is everything above that. And any edits you make in the top, which is the left side here, are going to show up at 100% in that portion of the photo. It's kind of a gradient here where it's going to be a reduced percentage. And I don't know specifically, but let's say it's like, 50% or so of your edit is going to show up in that gradient zone. this gradient zone is going to be reduced even further. Let's call, and I don't know the percentages, but let's call it like 25% of your edit is going to show up there. And then below this line is going to be 0, right? So that's how that works. Now, I'm just going to leave set orientation where it is because I'm not doing a whole lot here. I'm adding a little bit of contrast to the top of the photo. And I'm taking the warmth down a little bit. I'm just creating a little bit more blue and toning down some of that more saturated yellow in the top of the photo. So there's the before and there's the after. So not a huge change, but a little one. And then I'm going to go into the bottom tab and I'm just going to say, you know what, it's a little too dark on the bottom. So I'm going to bump up the exposure a little bit. I'm going to kind of even out that light, something like that, and add a little bit of contrast here as well. And same thing, I want the water to be a little bit bluer because the sky's kind of blue. So the water will often, obviously take on the hue of the sky. And so I want to darken, well, not darken, but just create a cooler temperature. So let me show you for the entire top and bottom tuning filter. I went from that to that. So to me, it sort of balanced out the light a little bit more because, again, a little bit darker in the bottom, a little bit brighter in the top, and lacking the same amount of contrast in both sides. But here, that's been applied. And one of the great things is I went to 12 on contrast on the bottom, and on top I went to 16. And so that's the beauty of that tool, is you can divide the photo however you see fit. And by the way, you can also do this kind of stuff. So I neglected to mention that. And you can change the zones, right? So you can say, well, I want that zone to be higher, and I want this photo to, blah, blah, blah. You can kind of see how it's changing based on the edits I've, oops, I missed that. The edits I've already applied, right? Because if you go to top, I added more contrast in the top, so now that's getting more contrasty up there. And in fact, I'm going to go back the way I was. So it was something like that, and it was about in the middle-ish, but I'm going to say done. But just FYI in that tool, you have a lot of flexibility and setting the orientation. If you're doing something with mountains and there's a crooked, not perfectly level horizon or whatever, it doesn't matter. You can use the tool and still, make those adjustments because of the set orientation. So that's about it for that photo. Let me show you the split screen. There's the before, which was the middle exposure, which is -2, and there's the after. So again, before and after, fairly saturated, and some would say incredibly saturated. You know what? There's one more thing I might do, and this is a fun thing, and that is HSL. And that's because in looking at this, something that really catches my eye is the green. It really sticks out. And so you can come in here and individually adjust these colors. You can say, well, I like that green. I want to add more saturation and go crazy. Or you can do what I was going to do, which is, hey, it's a little too green. I'm going to take it down. Also, the luminance is a great thing. You can brighten that green, or you can darken. That's obviously too dark there. You can darken the green. And in darkening that green, to my opinion, adds a little bit more contrast to the photo. So here's the before and the after. You may or may not like that that addition there, but it's just something to think about. And of course, you have all these colors to choose from. So there's 8 colors here. You can come in here and say, hey, I like those blues. I want to go a little bit more saturated on the blues. And so that's going to pop more color in the sky and the water because that's where the blues are. And so again, just fun to experiment with, but HSL's just very powerful and gives you a lot of capabilities. So that's really it for that photo, Abba.
Well, no, that's awesome. It is amazing what you were able to do with that, and just the before and after. I'm in awe of that. It's really a pretty picture.
Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, see what your next thing's gonna be. I could sit here for hours and watch you work.
Okay. Well, I don't have to be anywhere. I'm playing. So if we have time, I'll happily do another photo. But if we don't, I totally get it. We've kind of gone a little bit long, and I want to respect everybody's time because I know people are busy. So
yeah, maybe we should open it up to some questions.
Yeah,
and see if people have some special areas they want you to cover.
Okay, yeah, let's go for it.
And Lori, if there's any questions, if you want to, that people have typed in, if you want to go ahead and just ask those directly for the viewers, that would be great.
Yeah. Yep. Let's see here. So one of the questions actually is just answering, but this will be easier to show. if you wanted to open up multiple bracketed images and you wanted to see the original image, I was going to suggest to her to go under the layers. Jim, would you mind showing under layers? There's the
Yeah,
different
like
options.
we can
Yes,
add a layer and then choose one of the frames.
exactly.
Yeah, so yeah, you can do that obviously, and this is how you do it. And so I've done this. So for example, I shoot in cities a lot, and I love to do so, and especially like at blue hour when the lights come on. And so specifically, I remember, in fact, I think I did a video about this a long time ago, but there was a street in Italy, I think, and it was blue hour, and you got all the lines of the street sort of disappearing into the distance, but then you got the sky back there. And after I built the HDR and did all the editing, I really felt like I had a halo because of the, you know, the marked contrast and the difference between the intensity of the colors and all that of the buildings as they went down the street and the sky that sort of came up sort of in a pennant or triangular wedge shape, you know, above them, right? And so I just said, well, gosh, I can't, you know, I couldn't find a way to accurately fix that sky without a whole lot of work. And so that's a great example when you can just come in here and say, oh, you know what, I'll do the middle exposure of the sky, and that one's great. And you could just go add your layer, and this is going to look terrible, but you just added the layer, and then you can just go paint that sky on top of the photo, right? So if you had this horrible sky or whatever, you could, now I've got all these trees, so this is not the best example because you know, it's not going to be ideal. It's actually looking pretty good, to be honest. But anyway, so you could just mask in the sky and say, there you go, I've got my quote unquote original sky back. And then that would be an example of when you could use something like that to, you know, for example, overcome a halo if you had that. And so again, all you do is add new layer, you go to the bracket layer and you choose whichever, and then you can just grab the brush and paint it in. So I'm going to delete that because I prefer to look at my painterly one, but hopefully that answers the question, Lori.
Yeah, that was perfect. In fact, that actually answers another question. A gentleman was asking that bright cloud on the left, you know, how can you kind of pull that back? And you showed how to do that. So yeah.
Yeah, you could also just create a new layer, adjustment layer, and then come in here with highlights and just say, I want to take the highlights way down or something, you know, and then just go paint it in there or something. I'd have to experiment with it. Maybe it's whites, maybe that'd be better. I got kind of a bright spot there, but there's a lot of flexibility. So there's sort of, you know, more than one way to skin a cat. And that is kind of bright. I totally see what you're saying. It doesn't really bother me, but it could certainly get your attention. You bet.
Okay, great. And you were going to show another image?
If I have time, I'll edit another one. Sure.
Okay. A couple people are asking to see that. Thanks.
Yeah, let me see here. I better do a quick one that only has a couple of things on it. So let me do that real quick. Get this in Aurora. And I'm going to say alignment. I'm going to do the things I usually do. And this one, so here's an example. This one, in fact, I think there was a version of this photo that was on my splash screen when we started the webinar. I think that was the same photo. But anyway, in this situation, and you'll see this here in a minute, and that is I shot it, my first exposure, my furthest to the left was -5. That's as far as my camera will go. So it was a 3 exposure bracket set starting at -5. So it was -5, -3, and -1. And so it was really just too bright out for me. And, you know, I wanted it to come out better. So there's the middle exposure, which would be the -3. And there's the blended HDR. So you can see -5, -3, and -1. And by the way, this is a good time to talk about this thing. This is the histogram, and this is not going to be a lengthy class about histograms, but basically it shows you the distribution of light in your photo. The further to the left it is, it means the darker your photo is, and the further to the right it is, the brighter your photo is. Obviously, I'm very far to the left here, and there's also these little triangles. So you can click these triangles. When I click that one, that's to show me the hot pixels, as it says. And if you look in inside these street lamps here, they got these little red spot. You probably can't see the one there, but you can here. And that's the hot pixels. That means this is totally blown out. But now watch when I do this. This is for the cold pixels, right? Look at that. it highlights, these are areas that are basically completely black. And that's a lot, but I haven't done anything to the photo for starters. And also I kind of like them to be a little bit darker. And so let me slap a couple of edits on here just to sort of get us started. I'm going to get a little bit of contrast, which is only going to make it darker. I'm going to bump up HDR Enhance because I just love it and think it's a great tool. And then here's where Smart Tone really comes in. I'm going to go pretty far on Smart Tone, like, 70 or something like that. And so now if you look at my histogram, it's not evenly distributed, but I don't have quite as much as intense darks, and my blown pixels are going to be about the same, right? The truth is, I don't spend a lot of time looking at the histogram. It's important to understand it, I think, and I'm not saying you shouldn't spend time looking at it. I'm just saying I don't really, because I kind of edit based on feel and how the photo looks to me, and I don't really spend a lot of time considering so much like the quote unquote technical stuff, because I care more about, do I like the photo or not? And if I do, then great, I'm happy. I'm going to slap a little more color contrast and some vibrance here. You can see the photos coming to life really already. And I'm going to do something really quick here with top and bottom tuning. And all I'm going to do is kind of warm up that bottom because it's a little too blue. So I'm going to give that a little bit of warmth, which will bring up some of that color in those pavers and bricks, or cobblestone, whatever you call them. So that's a really quick edit, but we went from that to that. So if you look at the before and after, I mean, it's a massive difference. And if I wasn't yapping this whole time, that would have taken me a couple of minutes. And that's, to me, the beauty and the power of Aurora, is you can just do a whole lot in a very limited amount of time, which is actually really important to me because I came back from this trip with like 10,000 photos. So if you're counting 3 exposures each because of fire brackets, that's like, 3,300 photos that I could theoretically go edit, which I'm never going to get to be clear. But I don't want to spend, hours working on a photo. And that's why I think Aurora is so great, especially compared to something like Photomatics. I used that for years because it was kind of the only game in town. And as soon as I opened Aurora the first time, a few years ago, I was kind of like, oh my gosh, I couldn't believe it, because it allowed me to do the HDR merging and whatnot that I did in Photomatics. But when I used Photomatics, I always had to then take that photo and go somewhere else and make more edits. I'd have to get a different product. I'd use what was then called MacFun Intensify, right, to go add some filters and create some edits and create the mood that I wanted. And I used to keep my library in Aperture years ago. So then I'd go into Aperture and I'd move some sliders and try to, get my stuff looking the way I wanted it to look. As soon as I opened Aurora, I was like, oh my gosh, it's literally a one-stop shop, including denoise, which I always had to go somewhere else. So I was making 3, 4, 5, sometimes 6 round trips in the quote unquote old days. And I don't have to do that anymore. I can do it all right here. So that's what I love about Aurora and why I'm such a big advocate for the product, because, I can go from that to that in a matter of a couple of minutes, and I do it in one product. And, I don't want to learn 15 different products. I don't want to be great at everything because I don't have time. Life's too short. I just want to make pretty photos and enjoy what I do and take advantage of the power that's available to me. And it's right here in Aurora. So that's a quick edit. The only other thing I'd do would be go add some denoise. And, that's just my kind of standard thing. I like to go kind of smooth on the skies, sometimes give it a little boost, get those clouds looking all soft, and then come over here and do my brush masking, which is, admittedly going to be sloppy because of the trees and me being in a hurry and talking and all that. But I'll increase my brush, just kind of brush away some of that crunchiness that I added there. And you can see my mask, not very accurate, but, we're all friends here. So I'm just kind of hacking at this point on that. But that's what I would do to the photo. So quick and dirty edit of from that to that. And probably not exactly the same version as what I showed you on the splash screen when we opened up the webinar, but I think I fiddled around with that one a little bit more.
That's a rather pretty image for just fiddling around and knocking something out in a few minutes. It's very, very impressive. And I think you've really provided us an amazing amount of information on how you think and how you doctor your photos, or how you use Aurora to work with this and the history panel. That was
Yeah.
an eye opener, I think, for some folks because it's a very unique
Good.
feature to be able to open up a project file and still see everything you have done. So
Yeah.
it was a good
It-
hour. Thank you so much for giving us your time and teaching us some cool tricks. I think that's
Oh,
great.
you're absolutely welcome. Yeah,
Um,
it was a lot of fun. I appreciate everybody tuning in, and don't hesitate to hit me up on social media. And shameless plug here. If you follow me on YouTube, you'll see videos like this. I do a couple of videos a week, and so by all means, feel free to check that out. And just want to say thanks, everybody. I appreciate it. I hope it was helpful, and thanks again. And Abba and Laurie, thank you as well. I appreciate it.
Oh, well, our pleasure. Thank you. And I'm going to throw it back to you, Lori, for any closing comments. And I do want to point out that if you joined us late, this is being recorded. We'll post it in a couple of days. And, Jim is pretty fast at doing this, so you can easily rewatch this and see sections and see exactly how he's done some of the amazing things he does. So with that, Lori, take it away.
Okay, great. Yeah, again, thank you, Jim. Thank you, Alba. This was a great presentation. I did post, there's a link in the chat box, and it will take you to the video tutorials page. Jim does a lot of video tutorials on his site as well, but Alba's going to be posting this up probably just in a couple of days, but you can see a lot more videos as well. And hopefully you learned a bit from this webinar. We hope that you join us again.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. I appreciate it.